Okay, good afternoon and welcome everybody. My name is James Corliss. I am the new Chief Executive Officer of the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, or SACOG. We are delighted to have you all here on this webinar this afternoon. We have an excellent team that's going to really walk through what the recently passed Senate Bill 1 means for the Sacramento metropolitan region. And I think we started getting a lot of phone calls on Friday when people realized this bill had actually passed. It was through the legislature. It was being sent to the governor. And so questions really began piling up. Exactly what does this mean for streets and roads? What does it mean for my city? What does it mean for public transportation? What does it mean for intercity passenger rail? How does this affect what's happening in Congress right now? So we've got a great team together, and for the next hour, we're going to walk through a little bit of a presentation, and we are encouraging all of you to actually chat your questions through, and we'll have a moderated discussion with some Q&A to follow. And I am now going to turn it over to our very capable SACOG team, and starting off with Monica Hernandez, who is the communications manager here at SACOG. Monica is going to moderate this discussion. Over to you, Monica.
Thank you, James. Good afternoon, everybody. I have a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First, I wanted to let you know that we are recording this and we will post this on our website. In addition, we will also be providing this via link to all of you. I'm going to walk through our introductions in just one moment. First, we have James Corliss, the CEO of SACOG. Oh, excuse me, we're getting a little bit of a wrong screen here.
Still on your screen.
Okay, 1 second here. Having a little bit of an issue getting my screen back in control. All right, so starting off with our presenters today, we have James Corliss, Chief Executive Officer of the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. And we have Eric Johnson, our Manager of Policy and Administration, Matt Carpenter, our Director of Transportation Services, and we are very fortunate today to have Celia McAdam joining us from Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. She is the Executive Director here. And with those introductions, there is myself, Monica Hernandez. Again, please send us your questions via the chat function from GoToMeeting. You should each have a toolbar. You can send that right to the presenter. We will have everybody on mute throughout this webinar. So once we get to the question and answer session, I will be reading the questions and asking our guests to answer. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Johnson.
Well, thank you, Monica. So the impossible happened last week. As you heard from James, we have been operating under a gas tax that has not increased since 1994 in California. And so I just wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about what the history is of the gas tax in California and what SB 1 does to change that. Currently, there's an 18-cent a gallon gas tax that's been in place since 1994. And then in 2011, as part of a complicated tax swap at the state level, this variable gas excise tax came in that replaced the sales tax on gasoline. And what that's done is it's only delivered volatility and unpredictability for local jurisdictions in terms of their transportation revenues, going from 9 cents to 21.5 cents over time. SB 1 phases that out and replaces it with a more stable and predictable revenue stream. What SB 1 does first is adds a 12-cent a gallon increase starting this November. You'll see that in the second bar in the orange band on your screen. And then in 2019, they take the historical average 17 cents from what was the sales tax or the price-based tax on gas and add that on top of that. And then going forward, it's adjusted based on the CPI moving forward. And just for some comparison of where California is now and where it will be in the future, you see the U.S. average gas taxes and quite a few states that even have higher gas taxes now. And there's been a number of states that have raised those, but there's still half the states haven't raised gas taxes in the last few years. You might hear about that later. But SB1 is not solely depending on gasoline excise tax increases. As you'll see on the slide here, the value-based excise fee is the second largest source of funding, and it is a progressive-based tax. It changes based on what is happening with the value of the vehicles, and then as you'll see there is diesel sales tax and diesel excise taxes that all increase. It's worth noting that while it's a small portion of the pie, there is a new zero-emission vehicle fee, which is new for California and really is the first entry to the emerging electric vehicle market to have some contribution to the impact that those vehicles have on our roads. And the smallest, the second smallest share there you see is some outstanding loans from transportation that are returned to transportation from the State General Fund. Shifting over to expenditures, we'll talk about this at a high level, but Matt Carpenter will go into some more detail about the funding coming to our region, and we'll continue to talk about a number of competitive programs here in the future. SB1 is really designed as a fix-it-first bill, so that's really where the emphasis is. It divides the money evenly, half between local governments and half with the state. And you'll see on the slide there are some blue boxes. Those are those that go right out by formula to cities, counties, transit agencies, and Caltrans. On the top under the local share, while I mentioned that transit does go out by formula, there is an intercity rail component that is competitive, and so that's certainly something that could advantage the Sacramento region. And then on the state side, while there are a number of competitive programs that are considered state programs, again, those are projects on the state highway system that could really benefit projects in our region that are used for interregional and local trips as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Great. Well, thank you, Eric. And for quite a few years, we've all been talking about the serious maintenance and operations funding challenges in our region. In fact, tackling this issue became one of the top policy priorities in the latest update to our SACOG's long-range plan. The plan our policy board adopted last year has numerous strategies supporting this policy emphasis. And the next couple of slides offer some context as to how Senate Bill 1 supports the plan's emphasis on maintenance and operations. The pie chart here illustrates how road maintenance and rehabilitation already consume a large share of the average transportation agency budget in our region. On average, nearly 3/4 of a typical budget goes to these activities. Little is left for expansion projects. A disturbing trend has been the increase in the budget share going towards major road rehabilitation or reconstruction projects. This is the yellow slice of the pie. Costly reconstruction is needed when a road has not been properly maintained, and the trend is particularly a problem because reconstruction typically requires 5 to 10 times the amount of funding as just routine preventative maintenance. A big reason in our region for maintenance backlogs is the reliance on the gas tax. The declining purchasing power means that many agencies have actually seen real declines in their maintenance budgets over time. During our long-range plan updates, you may recall that Clint Holton shared some data that estimates our local agencies spent $2.9 billion on road maintenance and rehabilitation over a recent 10-year period. Our analysis suggests that this funding level would need to actually double in order to get these roads into a true state of good repair. Now, while Senate Bill 1 does not completely close this funding gap, it would make a big difference for at least the next 10 years. $919 million in Senate Bill 1 revenues would cover nearly 1/3 of the total maintenance needs in the region. A benefit from this boost in early investment is that many roads would actually get back into a preventative maintenance cycle. This basically virtuous cycle would reduce the need for more costly reconstruction later. I'm going to turn it over to Celia McAdam to give some perspective on what this may mean for you, the local agencies across our region.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to focus somewhat on Placer, but make my comments kind of, they generally apply to a lot of the suburban and rural jurisdictions around the 6-county region. And in looking at these charts, as you're seeing what's in it for me, because that's what it all comes down to, you can see that the amount of road rehab money that are going to local jurisdictions roughly equals what you're currently getting. So that combined with what you're currently getting roughly doubles what the gas tax revenues are, but that's still only about 2/3 of what you need to keep things in a state of good repair. And as you're looking at the smallest jurisdictions, 2 times almost nothing is still almost nothing. And so it's not as impactful for jurisdictions like Colfax. They're looking at $47,000 a year. That is not going to bring them from a PCI of 40 up to 85. There's also strings on this money, and you know, you have to do a maintenance of effort, and there's a lot of reporting that gets involved with this. Scope, schedule, budget has to be reported to the CTC. There are considerations like climate change, recycled materials, complete streets that are to the extent possible and cost effective. So those are considerations that have to go in this. So you know, that's something that local jurisdictions need to be aware of. There's also funding here that goes to the State Transportation Improvement Program, or the STIP, and of course, you know, 75% of that trickles down to the counties. And so we're looking at maybe going back to, instead of a negative situation where we're pushing projects out, we might see a more normal cycle. It looks like Placer will see about $7 million a year, which of course, considering we still owe about $45 million, might mean we might program a project someday. But in other counties, we can look forward to more normal cycles. There's other smaller pots of money that Eric referred to. A lot of those are competitive, and you know, the devil's always in the details. What is the criteria for winning that money? And that's going to be going through the CTC. One of the pots of money is the state-local partnership, which is $200 million a year, and that's essentially a self-help county match program, but it's phrased in a way that would allow not just, you know, your classic self-help counties, but also perhaps local impact fee programs. In Placer County, we have the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority, or SPARTA, that's a regional impact fee program, and having things like that be eligible for those matching funds. El Dorado County has their TIM fees. That would be another example there, but you know, the definitions have not been worked out. There's likewise goods movement, freight, $300 million a year. Need to define what the competitive criteria are. There's also a very small amount of money, in my opinion, a very small amount of money for congestion corridors. Only about 2% of the money, $250 million a year. And it's not exactly when I think of congestion corridors, I often think of road expansion, but it's much more than that. It can be transit, it can be bikeways, it can be local streets and roads, it can be a lot of different things. So I think that this pot of money is going to be incredibly competitive, and the bottom line is it's not going to solve our traffic congestion problems. You know, certainly in Placer County, it's not going to fix the 80-65 interchange. It's not going to widen 65. So I want to provide that perspective there, that this is not the end-all, be-all, but it certainly is a step in the right direction when it comes to road maintenance.
Well, thank you, Celia. And just one thing I'd also to mention is that through the planning process to update our long-range plan, the SACOG board also discovered that there's a funding challenge for transit operations. This funding burden is largely a local one because most federal and state transit revenues are restricted to just capital purposes. The key challenge that this creates is a reliance on volatile sales tax revenue sources. And the impacts from this volatility are clear. For example, many operators in our region have yet to fully recover from the funding declines they experienced during the Great Recession. Now, in contrast to road maintenance needs, SB1 does not have as large an impact on transit operating needs. The orange bar you see for Senate Bill 1 represents what would be 8% of the total funding needs for transit operations in a recent year, 2015. Now, this may seem like the impact is modest, but it would actually make a real difference. Over 10 years, an estimated $151 million would be made available to our transit operators. Now, SB1 revenues for transit have a couple of really important advantages. One is that they'll be stable and more predictable than sales tax revenues, but also that they'll become a more flexible revenue source that could go to either operating transit services or paying for capital needs. And as we all know, some of those important critical transit capital needs include replacing buses and light rail vehicles. Now, in terms of next steps, the full implementation of Senate Bill 1 will take 4 years. You can see here that the key state revenue milestones for each year. The first fuel taxes take effect this year, and then the loan repayments occur over the next 3 years. Starting in 2019 and thereafter, taxes and fees increase based on the Consumer Price Index. In 2019, the gas tax swap ends, and then finally in 2020, the zero-emission vehicle fee starts. I just want to highlight a few to underscore some of the points that Celia made about some of the coordination ahead for our regional agencies. Here in 2017, and well before the revenues from the new fuel tax began to flow this November, our regional agencies in Placer, El Dorado, and the SACOG region will be actively involved in a wide range of implementation efforts. Some of these key efforts include actively participating on implementation working groups the state will be setting up. And among the efforts expected is shaping selection criteria for some of the new state programs Celia mentioned. Some of these new programs in Senate Bill 1 include the Congested Corridors Program and the Trade Corridors Program. Another effort that will start this year is identifying and prioritizing projects that we believe can compete well for the competitive state funds. In partnership with local agencies, our regional agencies would evaluate the lessons learned from past experiences. For example, our experience with the Proposition 1B bond programs can be very insightful. We all collectively, we really want to make sure region and local agency coordination is clear and project selection is performance-based. Other efforts this year include developing new regional funding program targets. As Celia mentioned, a new STIP fund estimate will come out this summer, and we expect it will lead to significant increases in the amount of funding that will come from the state. SACOG, El Dorado, and Placer will use this new revenue for future programming cycles. And then finally this year, we anticipate shaping new regional project delivery policies and streamlining strategies. The infusion of new state funding provides an enhanced opportunity for agencies to leverage federal and state funding into implementation. Our common goals include reducing delivery complications and accelerating the completion of projects. As we look a little bit further out in the 2018 to 2019 period and the revenues really begin to flow, our regional agencies will continue the planning and coordination efforts with local member agencies. Some of the key efforts we expect include incorporating Senate Bill 1 into the long-range plan updates that each of our 3 regional agencies will be doing during that time. Some of the planning issues that we'll be looking at will be revising road maintenance and transit state of good repair funding gap analyses, as well as updating project lists and developing new implementation strategies for priority near-term projects. During that time period, 2018 to 19, we'll also be conducting regional programming rounds because the increase in state funding to the regions through SB1 should result in significant more funding to go along with the available federal funds. SACOG alone expects that the next funding round in 2018 will have at least $150 million to program. And then finally, we can see during this period that we'll continue to be providing technical assistance to local agencies competing for funding through the competitive state programs. Our past experience suggests that local region cooperation increases the competitiveness of applicants pursuing state or federal funds. And then finally, as we get to full implementation of SB1, our regional agencies will continue to offer technical assistance and seek collaboration opportunities with our local agencies. So that's kind of a highlight of many details to come. But with that, I'm going to turn it back over to James Corliss.
Thanks, Matt. I think we wanted to close out in many ways for me to give a little bit of national context into exactly what California has just done as a state. Before I do that, by the way, I do want to just really encourage all of you, explore that chat feature, chat in these questions. We'd love to do some Q&A while we again have this panel here and the experts in the room. So certainly from my vantage point, being in Washington, D.C. the last 8 years, actually working in a lot of state capitals the last 6 to 8 years, it's important that we understand California and what SB has done in a national context and a national story. In 2012, Congress passed a transportation bill, a federal transportation bill, as they used to do every 5 or 6 years. Nothing is regular order at this point in Washington. And for the first time ever in 2012, the federal bill did not actually increase funding. In fact, they scraped together every penny they could just to flatline a bill for 2 very short years. And what that really did is it sent shockwaves through the states. Federal funding had increased really significantly since the beginning of the first Interstate Highway Act in 1956. Once the states actually got this impression that Congress was no longer going to come to our rescue, you actually had states starting in 2013, 2014, and 2015 increasing gas taxes, putting sales taxes on the top of gasoline, very similar to what California has done. And it is true that actually 23 other states have taken action along the lines of what California did just last Friday. So we are no means on the cutting edge, I'm afraid to say, on this. And in many ways, again, it's really important to understand that what those states have done, and I think what California just did, was really play catch-up. They played catch-up because, as you heard Eric Johnson say earlier, California hasn't raised its state gas tax since 1994, and many of the other states were in a 20 to 25-year drought, as it were, in terms of revenue increases. We don't do a very good job of indexing our revenues to inflation, of indexing to CPI, so they basically stay stagnant and they lose purchasing power over time. So as tremendous as it was, what the legislature did on Thursday night here in the state capitol, and as remarkable as it's been for 23 other states to raise those revenues, it is really important to understand that is not the final story. That is not going to solve all of our transportation problems. In many ways, we were playing catch-up. It's going to significantly help on state of good repair. But there are going to be other things like local ballot measures, like federal funding, like an infrastructure package from Congress, which we would hope to see released sometime this year, that are still going to be really important. So again, context, California actually looks very much in the middle of the pack. Yes, we will have one of the higher state gasoline taxes after SB 1 fully kicks in, but not the highest by any means. And we will not take care even of all of our state of good repair needs. So again, I wanted to provide a little bit of that national context and what other states are doing. The final thing I'll say, which I think is interesting in a lot of other states that we've tracked around the country, is that they have often paired what I would call revenue with reform. Sometimes the reform comes first, sometimes it comes after. But in states as diverse as Virginia and Iowa and Massachusetts and Wyoming, oftentimes there's a real look at both not just raising the revenue, but also how we spend that money. And a theme, which I think you're going to hear a lot of in the months ahead, is really trying to be much more transparent and data-driven and performance-based in terms of how we pick not necessarily the state of good repair projects, but the bigger new capacity projects. Indeed, the feds themselves and the U.S. Department of Transportation have just finished some rulemaking the last few months that will really require all of us at the state level, at a regional level, to implement a much more data-driven, performance-based process for evaluating transportation projects. So that's a theme. I think you're seeing that in other states. I think you're going to hear a lot of that in our region in the months and the years ahead, certainly as we dive into our next MTP. So with that, again, I think it's really good news, obviously what the state has done. Your legislators are to be thanked for, I think, taking a very tough vote. it is a really big deal. There is still a lot more work to be done. And so I think with that, I think we've had perhaps a few questions and want to get into discussion. So back to you, Monica.
Great. Thank you, James. We do have some questions. And just a quick note, if you do want to send one that the whole chat won't see, you can set just to presenter, and then I will field those questions again. Our first question is actually, in which fiscal year will the revenue begin to flow to local agencies? Is it partially in fiscal year 17-18 or in fiscal year 18-19?
It will start to flow in the coming fiscal year in 17-18 with the fuel taxes come online beginning in November of this year.
It's a continuous appropriation.
Great, thank you. And then another question, will SACOG be adopting the new STA allocations for fiscal year 2018, and if so, when?
We do anticipate that one of the early implementation activities is going to be taking the forecast and how this new revenue impacts accounts such as the state transit account and getting it back to the local agencies as soon as possible. So we will be working, in fact, we have reached out to the California Transit Association to check some of the estimates that are what's available to the region and what goes directly to local agencies. I will caution that one other thing, and specific to the state transit account that we are also monitoring, though, is legislation that talks about what agencies are actually eligible to receive SDA funds. It is a policy issue that's going to warrant some discussion here at SACOG, both through our advisory group, the Transit Coordinating Committee, and potentially our board. But you have our commitment to work swiftly to try to get those monies out in a timely manner.
Great, thank you. That was Matt Carpenter. And then next question for Eric Johnson. The League of Cities published annual funding estimates for 2019 that are lower than the 10-year average in your list. Why is there a discrepancy?
So our estimates were developed before the league analysis that just come out. Again, we were taking 1-year estimates and forecasting them out over 10 years. Now that we have a bill and there's more factors that we can anticipate, there are specific yearly amounts that the league is starting to publish numbers on. But again, whether it's the league data or SACOG data, I just want to stress that these are estimates, and so they change every year as with your local streets and roads funds that you already get. So don't rely exactly on the numbers that you see. They are just estimates, but it's supposed to give you kind of an order of magnitude of what you should expect.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say roughly they're doubling, and that's kind of a rule of thumb to start thinking about how you want to spend the money and what roads you want to rehab, but don't necessarily pencil out the exact budget quite yet.
Thank you both. That kind of ties into another question, and I'm going to go ahead and ask Eric. It was projected in an earlier slide that El Dorado County would receive about $69 million over the next 10 years. Is there any estimate on what will be received during 2017-2018? And I think perhaps if we could just kind of ad hoc describe how we will update or how we might communicate out when we revise these estimates, of how we might communicate that out to our stakeholders.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the rough estimate that we were working on for El Dorado County was $6.9 million a year. So we just multiplied that by 10. That's not really complicated math we're doing for those. But again, the state will be publishing estimates annually going forward. So those are the numbers that local agencies should be relying on for budgeting purposes.
Yeah, I mean, this is Celia McAdam. I know everybody's really anxious. You've been starved for money for so long, and the prospect of having it even a little bit more is you want to get the pavement out there. I'm going to guess if the gas tax increase happens in November, that is, then 7 months out of your 12 months, and, there's a lot of engineers on the phone, can do the math and get some idea of what that impact might be for 17-18.
Great. Thank you. A couple of questions coming in on what this means for the STIP. Specifically, we're being asked if SACOG would consider funding projects in Tier 2 that aren't currently funded. So I'll stop right there, and then I have a follow-up.
Yeah, clearly the idea there is that through our last funding round, as those folks may recall, we had just under $100 million to program. As a result, we created a backup list, a Tier 2 list of projects that would be funded if there were savings or potentially more money later. It is a board policy discussion, something that we will probably have with the board in the coming months, and we'll be notifying sponsors as that moves forward.
Great, thank you. And then related is projects that were defunded under the STIP. Just the same answer?
Well, we've remained consistent with our policy commitment to projects that we thought we were going to match with STIP dollars, that we've ultimately matched either with federal dollars or look for other implementation strategies. This just simply creates more opportunities for some projects to get back into the STIP, but we remain committed to working with project sponsors on any time our board makes a policy commitment to fund a project, we do our best to find the right color of money. This simply allows for the STIP to yet again be one of those options for implementing.
Great. Thank you.
I'll add, I think it'll be interesting to see how the CTC reacts to this in terms of this is an issue that's all over the state. A lot of projects were defunded because the STIP was short of money. And it's not even whether those projects will come back in, but it's also what year they will come back in at. And that's going to be a discussion. The CTC is going to have a lot of meetings. There's going to be a lot of subcommittees dealing with not only this issue, but some of the competitive pots. And I know that, Placer is going to be involved, SACOG is going to be involved. I'm sure El Dorado is going to be involved as well to make sure that our needs are part of the discussion.
Great. Thank you. Another question related to transit funding. Has SACOG calculated how much of the transit funds will flow to cities and counties by formula? Have we done that estimate yet?
We do have, from what the state has provided, we do have some estimates to specific transit agencies. And that we also, as folks may be aware, the state transit account comes as kind of to the region, and there is a subset that comes directly to transit agencies. Please contact us if you'd like to get that information, but it's also, that attachment is attachment B in what will be the board policy memo.
The memo that Matt is describing is in a staff report that we presented to our board. We will provide a link to that staff memo in our follow-up to this webinar. And then another interesting question. Where can we find the details of calculating the margin of error required under SB 1? Will it be different than past methods? And
wow, that is a math question. I don't know.
There's certain variables that are fairly elastic, and there's a certain assumptions that go into any of these estimates because there is a certain base of just of activity that assumes what and how much sales, how much fuel tax you generate. So we'd be happy to point you to what we're aware the state used for these estimates, but I would caution you that as with the past, it's very hard to predict with great certainty.
Great, very much both. Another question, will the local planning money be available for cities or only for RTPAs?
We do not know right now. But we are monitoring that, and there is going to be, that's yet again one of the examples of Caltrans have already reached out to some of the regions saying that this is a dialogue that will continue. One of the early ideas that they have floated would be to put that money towards some of their discretionary grants that they give out annually. But that's by no means the certain path forward, but just something that's been discussed.
Great. Thank you. Next question. As you know, transit operators have a huge backlog of bus replacement needs. What's to prevent a rural jurisdiction from using STA to free up LTF for road projects? If this was to happen, transit could theoretically get a net increase near zero.
These policy actions occur at the local level through the Transportation Development Act Unmet Needs process annually. We're happy to provide any technical analysis we can provide on this, but these are local decisions for those jurisdictions outside of regional transit that have the option to fund transit and road maintenance. The regional transit district is unique in that all the dollars that come through the local transportation fund need to go to transit.
Great, thank you. And we're actually going back, I misread the question we had earlier where I said margin of error. Sorry, I have stats on the mind apparently. Where can we find the details of calculating the maintenance of effort, not the margin of error?
And I don't have the specifics on that, but generally the maintenance of effort on your road rehab is that if you are putting a certain amount of your general fund money into your road rehab, it's expected you will continue to do that, as well as however much of your gas tax, however much of your LTF money if you're in a rural area, that you will continue to put the same level of funding as you are now, and that the SB1 revenues are additive to that, that you're not swapping one color of money for another.
Thank you. And do you know when the STA funds will be distributed to agencies? The time frame they're questioning?
This simply relates to the earlier remark that we're doing our best to both look at the estimates so that they're as accurate as possible, and then we're also monitoring state legislation that may have implications for the eligibility of agencies in our region that can get such funds.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to remind everyone this bill passed Thursday night. And so everybody is scrambling to try and figure out what it actually means in terms of the details. There were, there were drafts of things that were available before, but until something is actually passed, you don't know. So as information is available, it's going to be distributed both to us at regional agencies from the state as well as to our member jurisdictions.
And technically it hasn't been signed into law.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, exactly.
I'm pretty sure it's gonna.
Yeah, but it's
So some cities have local sales tax measures that are partly dedicated to transportation. Are these cities eligible to receive local partnership funds?
That hasn't been decided yet, but I will tell you candidly, I would argue against it because those sales taxes were passed with a 50% majority, so it says that they are not specifically a transportation sales tax because the legislation does say self-help counties, and I believe it will go to jurisdictions with fees and sales taxes that are solely dedicated to transportation. Of course, devil is always in the details, and this is something the CTC is going to be working out, and I believe that they're supposed to have that information or those guidelines available by January.
Great. So we've had a little lull in the questions coming through the chat. Very interested in hearing from you, Celia. What does this mean for the future of local ballot measures? Should we kind of be resting on our laurels?
Yeah, no. As I mentioned before, this really helps with road rehab, no question about that, and it helps somewhat with transit and some of the other modes, but this is it's not going to do anything for the big projects that we had that were included in Measure M, which sadly only got 64% support this past November. We are looking very strongly at putting another measure on the ballot, one that is more focused, possibly in 2018. We're talking with our jurisdictions. We're going to be talking with the public about seeing what that might look like if there continues to be support. But, the fact is that SB1 is not going to widen Highway 65, and that's really needed. It's not going to redo the 8065 interchange. Again, very much needed. It's not going to front money for some of those projects that are funded through developer impact fees that are needed right now, things like widening Baseline Road. It's not going to do a lot of the things that we need to do in Placer County. So we are continuing to look at a transportation sales tax, and I'd expect that other counties in the region are doing the same.
And this is James Corliss. I would add on that too in terms of the federal level, right? Because I think many of you may be going back, whether it's cap to cap or your own trips or talking to your federal representatives, and you might hear them say, boy, that's fantastic what you guys did in California, so now you don't need any of our help anymore. And while I mentioned the sort of the promise of this new $1 trillion at the top of the call, far more likely is actually cuts that might come down through a whole variety of processes and continuing resolutions in the current federal budget. For instance, we are looking at cuts to the Tiger program that has funded a lot of locally driven projects around the region and the state. We're looking cuts to the New Starts and Small Starts program, which is critical for new transit expansion projects in the region. So I think it's really important that everybody understands, as great as this is, it does not ameliorate the need for ballot measures. It doesn't ameliorate the need for actually, as small, relatively speaking, as the federal assistance is to the state. Those are critical seed funds, and they can't go away. So we really want to impart that to everybody today, that this does not take care of those other fund sources.
I was also going to bring up something else that's good news as part of SB1, and that is the infusion of money to the SHOP program. And that's particularly of interest in rural areas where, you know, a state highway might be your main street. You know, I'm thinking like Live Oak or, you know, where it's Highway 99. You know, certainly in those rural areas, this brings a shot of money into the SHOP program that Caltrans is going to be able to better maintain and improve safety on those roads that are being punished. And certainly through this winter weather, we've seen the impacts on not only, of course, local roads, but the state highway system is just getting pummeled. And having some money back into the SHOP is really going to help deal with some of those things and make an impact on the local jurisdictions as well.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add, Matt? Okay. I am going to turn it over where one last call for questions through the chat. We've kind of hit a lull here. While we wait for a few more last questions, I'm going to turn it over to James Corliss, SACOG's Chief Executive Officer, for some remarks.
Thanks, Monica. And just a few things, I guess, to sort of maybe wrap up the call, short of any final questions. You know, we as Celia said, and it's really important to remember, and Eric as well, this has not actually reached the governor's desk yet. So we are really still in the transportation time frame. We're moving very fast on this, but we thought it was really important to jump on the phone with all of you in this webinar to really provide you as much as we knew at this point because there were so many questions. We thought it was an important service for all of you out there, the region, your jurisdictions, and your agencies to tell you basically what we know as we know it. And if you have any thoughts on this webinar format and feedback, please let us know. We want to make this as helpful as possible to all of you rather than kind of waiting for the committees and our regular order. We wanted to get this out as soon as we could, and I really appreciate everybody's participation. Number two, I would just say I think the fine print, as you've heard, but it's worth reiterating, is that don't take these numbers to the bank yet, right? We are trying to give you a sense, not quite orders of magnitude, but really a sense of where are the funds going to come from and how much are they going to be in order to do things like streets and roads. But as you've heard already today, I think we'll see much more precise numbers coming out in the next couple of days, whether it's the League of Cities or the state. So hold on to those numbers. It's really to give you a sense of the sort of the scale of what we're talking about in different pots. Third, I wanted to really, again, just touch on a couple of points our presenters have made here. There is a lot to be decided still at the state level. The devil really is in the details, and I would encourage all of us at a regional level to really weigh in on the development of those guidelines because it can either work for our region or it could not. And I think that's going to be a really important. Yours are going to be critical voices, and I certainly will commit that here at SACOG we'll do whatever we can to make sure we prepare you to weigh in on those guidelines, Caltrans, CTC, and others. So that much of that is still to be decided. It was not actually put all the way into to the statute itself. It's still to come, and I think we have a very important role to play, not just as SACOG, but as all of you to weigh in on those. And then finally, I would just say, you saw the state pots of money. We have a number of competitive grants in there. I want us to be the most competitive we can be in these, and we're going to have to. I know we've had a lot of competitive grants before, but I think we need to. I will commit to us doing whatever we can to make sure that we're truly competitive in these statewide pots. It's really important, right? That our region gets not just a fair share, but gets the best projects forward that we possibly can, so we can advocate for them. And I think that's a really important message to sort of leave you all with in terms of kind of regional cooperation and how much we're going to need each and every one of you on the webinar today. So with that, I think maybe we have one last question.
We do. We have another question. This will be very interesting. Another threat to transit is the possible reduction in FTA funds that are used for operating and capital purposes. What is the likelihood of that happening?
Well, maybe I'll, since I'm fresh off the boat from DC, maybe I'll take a first crack at that. This is James Corliss again. You know, at the federal level, I would say this is the best of times, this is the worst of times. We've never had a president who, frankly, has talked about infrastructure so much. We've never had a president who's put the notion of infrastructure into his inaugural address, perhaps since Lincoln. And we've never had somebody talking about $1 trillion in his first couple of months. So that's the promise, and that's the sort of, I think, why many in the industry are sort of thinking, okay, this is our moment for infrastructure for all kinds. It's the worst of times because for a variety of reasons, we're going to have a lot of pressure on the budget coming up at the federal level, partly which we're going to have a huge increase per the White House in military spending. So that's going to put a lot of pressure on domestic discretionary spending. Where are you going to get that? Where are you going to relieve that pressure? Unfortunately, you're going to relieve it from the very programs that I think we all care about and that we all benefit from. And you're seeing that through things like FTA funds. Already I mentioned New Starts, Small Starts. If you want a bus rapid transit, if you want light rail to the Sacramento airport, if you want the streetcar to get finished, these are all really critical funds that we have to defend. We haven't seen the formula funds yet, I think, be threatened, but hang on, because we have a CR that expires April 28th, the end of this month. We got to get then to the end of the federal fiscal year, September 30th, and then we're getting into FY18. So it is sort of cognitive dissonance back in DC that we can talk about $1 trillion on the one hand and take away with the other. But that is the time we're living in. And I would say, much like my admonition for all of us to be active at the state level, we're going to need everybody's voices at the federal level to make sure we don't lose ground. We don't do one step forward at the state level and take one step back federally.
I would just add, to the point about speaking with a common voice, we did have a white paper that was presented to the board last month that we can share with the presenter and others that just talked about what would be the potential impacts from significant cuts in transit. And it also identifies some policy actions that we believe we'll need to continue to advocate for. So please let us know if you have questions and see if we can maybe work together to try to advocate for sustainable transit funding.
And this is Eric Johnson too. I'd like to just, bring it back to the whole federal funding picture as well. On the state level, we're moving off of the first increase since 1994. In Washington, it's the first increase since 1993, and we have a highway trust fund that is not really solvent. We have a FAST Act right now, which, like its predecessor, is built on transfers and kind of budgetary one-time gimmicks. Well, the judgment day is coming on that, and I think, certainly, if not this year, as James alluded to, the pressure on transit, the pressure on all the federal spending is something we're going to continue to see. So it's important to emphasize that, there is a strong federal role, that we can't just dismantle the federal program and let the states do what they want to do. That's really essential, and we need to start having that conversation about, well, what do we do to make the trust fund solvent for the foreseeable future?
Well, and this, Celia, and let me also add, in James mentioning the figure of $1 trillion for infrastructure has been bandied about in Washington by a number of folks, and as you start to dive into the details of what that means, it's not $1 trillion in cash by any means. It may be some sort of public-private partnership. It might be, I understand the House Speaker Ryan said that he expects $40 of private money for every dollar of federal money. And private money may mean local money. There's a lot of very amorphous kind of things going on, as well as what infrastructure really is. I mean, somebody says infrastructure to me, I think it's transportation because I'm a transportation person. But in DC, it can also mean energy transmission. It can mean a lot of other things that are not, roads and bridges and sort of the standard infrastructure that you think of. So again, this is not a situation where, as you're hearing things bandied about. It's not like a check you can go and cash. So I just want to manage people's expectations that way as well.
Thank you. And we have no other questions online, so I want to thank our presenters, Celia McAdam, Executive Director of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, James Corliss, Chief Executive Officer here at SACOG, Matt Carpenter, Director of Transportation Services here at SACOG, Eric Johnson, Manager of Policy and Administration here at SACOG. This is Monica Hernandez. I will be following up with everyone who provided an email to us, and in that follow-up, I will include our staff report on Senate Bill 1, a link to an evaluation of this webinar so you can give us feedback as we move forward and do more of these, a link to the recording of this, and a PDF copy of the presentation. With that, thank you and goodbye.